Just I wanted to ask, do you think a reason why a lot of people, even libertarians, get the intellectual property issue wrong is I sometimes think maybe it's a little bit to do with, at least partly, due to a kind of linguistic trick. Because we always talk about, oh, like someone stealing someone's idea, but
Yes,
that's not really the proper word. Like if I steal
correct.
your car, you don't have your car anymore. If I quote unquote
Yeah,
steal your idea,
yeah,
you still have your idea. So I haven't really stolen it, I've copied it. And it's almost like, because of the language we use with intellectual property, it almost begs the question. We're calling it property off the bat. And then when we
correct.
talk about stealing someone's idea, again, it's begging the question because we're saying, oh, well, we're taking it from them. But that's not, although that's the language we use, it's not the reality. The reality is we're copying. Like an analogy would be if I looked at your house and built a house that was identical
Correct.
to it, if I look at your idea, I'm just going to copy it. I'm not actually, I haven't deprived you from it. So there's no aggression. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's 100% correct. And I think this shows the importance of being, this annoys people sometimes when they say, oh, you're going lawyer mode because you're being too precise or anal or whatever. But sometimes you need to be very precise and careful about terms because they do have ambiguous meanings or multiple meanings. And equivocation can often set in, even unintentionally sometimes. I think that what happens is in the pre-digital age, okay, um, you could get away with being a little bit sloppy with these metaphors by saying that you have the right to your to the fruits of your labor, for example. That's another you have the right to the fruits of your labor because what they mean by that is that if you have your own body and you're not hurting anyone and you own something you got by contract or some farm that you homesteaded on your own, that you can profit off of that if you're successful because you have the dominion over that and you can sell it. So people start thinking, oh, you have the right to the fruits of your labor. And then what they're doing is they're criticizing, well, why should the government take it from me? I made it, right? So you start thinking, but the mistake doesn't mean that much. But in the digital age, when a primary part of the value of things is in the shape of it, or in the a book, for example, or the patterning of it, then we sort of lose sight of the nature of property rights and how they have to be bound up with tangible material things that over which there can be conflict. And you start thinking in terms of value. So this is like Hans Hermann Hoppe has this point, which I think is another neglected and very important point. Something we have to emphasize: there is no property right to the value of things, and in fact, that's an Austrian insight, right? So in fact, this is one mistake the Randians make, I think, and they make it following Locke and this. So Locke's idea is that you own your body, so you own your labor. So now you have this non-tangible substance which and the reason you own it is because it has a value, right? So the Randians will say that we have a property right in values. They use the word values like as a plural or as a noun. Whereas in Austrian economics, we say you demonstrate your preference or you demonstrate your value. You value things, or you value outcomes, but you don't actually own value. Value is not a material substance of a thing. There's no intrinsic value in a thing. But when you so for example, if I own a home and I have a rose garden, which everyone likes to see, even my neighbors, it actually might enhance the value of my neighbor's property because if they were to sell their home, the buyer might say, "Oh, I get to look at a beautiful rose garden." But if I tear that rose garden down and I have an ugly house, I I actually reduce the value of their property. But that's not a trespass because they don't have a property right in the value of the property. Because, and again, it's like the customer thing. It's like if people say, "Oh, you stole my customers from me because you knocked off my iPhone." Well, but you didn't own your customers, did you? By the way, in your example about um this the use of language, if you get precise and you say, well, you said that I stole your I knocked you off, or I was a pirate, or I I I, I stole your idea by selling a similar smartphone to you. And if you point out as you did, but you still have your phone and you still have your designs and you still have your ability to make them, then they will say, well, what I really mean is you stole the money. I'm like, well, what money? They'll say, well, the money I could have made. You mean the money you could have made if you had a monopoly and you could prevent people from competing? Yeah. I'm like, well, so in other words, I stole the money that's currently owned by possible customers who own the money. You don't own their money, they own it. Are you saying you have a property right in the money in the money in the pockets of your potential customers? And they don't want to say that, but they'll say no, but I could have made, so it's if you push them, they will certainly concede. And then they go to question begging. They'll say, yeah, but when you competed with me, you stole my property. It's like, yeah, but the whole debate was about whether you should have a property that, and in fact, the debate's already won because it's already lost on your side because you and I both already agree that I own my factory, you own your factory. Okay? So nothing I did violated your rights. I stole your customers, but they weren't your customers. By the way, I think it's not Mencken, it's someone. Let me see if I can find the quote. He had this quote. It's about the use of the word the possessive. Like if I say my wife, okay, that we use that word in English all the time. My wife, my son, but doesn't mean I own her because because there's a possessive used doesn't imply a property relationship. And the same thing is true of like my idea or my invention. That's just a way of giving credit or authorship or admitting or acknowledging who came up with the idea. It doesn't mean that you own it, right? So just if someone acknowledges that, like Thomas Edison, which he didn't, by the way, but let's say Thomas Edison came up with the idea of the incandescent light bulb, it's his idea, but it doesn't mean that it's his property right. We have to be careful not to let language corrupt our thinking.